Maxwell Harrington stood at the panoramic window of his oceanfront mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, watching whitecaps break against the rocky shore below. At 65, he had accumulated everything a man could desire: the sprawling estate, a thriving investment firm, and respect throughout New England's business community. Yet the view that had once brought him peace now served only as a cruel reminder of what he'd lost. His fingers absently rubbed his lower back, where chronic pain had become his constant companion. The spasms had grown worse in recent weeks, making it difficult to focus on anything, including the quarterly reports awaiting his review on his mahogany desk. Mr. Harrington? His personal assistant, Olivia Chen, appeared at the doorway of his home office. The massage therapist has arrived. Should I send her in? Maxwell nodded, straightening his posture with effort. Yes, please, and Olivia, make sure we're not disturbed. I need to get these reports reviewed by tonight. Of course, sir. Olivia's efficiency was one of the reasons he'd promoted her, from intern to personal assistant, within 6 months of hiring her. Ms. Walker comes highly recommended. Multiple certifications in therapeutic massage and pain management. She's been working with several clients from your country club. Maxwell settled into the leather recliner he'd had installed in the corner of his office specifically for these treatments. He'd resisted the idea of massage therapy for months, viewing it as an admission of weakness, until his doctor had practically insisted. Perfectionism and stubbornness had built his empire. They weren't traits he could simply abandon. The door opened again, and Maxwell turned to greet the therapist. Mr. Harrington, I'm Rebecca Walker. It's a pleasure to meet you. The young woman who entered couldn't have been more than 30, with a warm smile and confident manner that put him immediately at ease. Until he saw it. Hanging delicately around her neck was a small emerald butterfly. Pendant, its wings catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. The room seemed to tilt beneath him as 2 decades of carefully maintained composure threatened to shatter. That necklace, identical in every detail to the one his daughter Eliza had worn. The one she'd been wearing when she vanished without. A trace during their family vacation to Cape Cod 20 years ago. It had been custom-made for her 13th birthday. A Maxwell Harrington signature gift, one of a kind, exquisite, and beyond price. Mr. Harrington, are you all right? Rebecca's voice sounded distant, as though coming from underwater. With tremendous effort, Maxwell pulled himself back from the precipice of raw emotion. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his phone. I apologize, Ms. Walker, he managed, his voice remarkably steady, despite the hurricane of questions whirling through his mind. Something urgent has come up with one of our European investments. I'm afraid I'll need to reschedule. Rebecca nodded understandingly, gathering her supplies. Of course, these things happen. Shall I speak with your assistant about finding another time? Yes, please do. Maxwell stood, careful to maintain his composed facade while his thoughts raced. Where had she gotten that necklace? Could it possibly be a coincidence? Was he finally losing his grip after all these years? As Rebecca turned to leave, Maxwell impulsively called after her. That's a beautiful necklace, by the way, very unique. Rebecca's hand instinctively rose to touch the emerald butterfly. Thank you. It's very special to me. I've had it since I was a child. A shadow crossed her face briefly. It's one of the few things I have from before the orphanage. The word orphanage struck Maxwell like a physical blow. He didn't trust himself to respond, merely nodding as Rebecca left the room. The moment the door closed behind her, Maxwell collapsed into his chair, pulling open his desk drawer with shaking hands. Inside was a framed photograph he rarely allowed himself to look at anymore. Eliza on her 13th birthday, proudly wearing her new emerald butterfly necklace, her smile brighter than the summer sun. He placed a call to his longtime friend and attorney, James Whitaker. James, I need your help, Maxwell said without preamble when the call connected. I need the best private investigator in New England, today, and I need absolute discretion. An hour later, after briefly seeing Rebecca to her car, Maxwell found Olivia waiting with an expectant expression. Would you like me to schedule another appointment with Ms. Walker? She asked. Yes, Maxwell replied after a calculated pause, but not for at least 2 weeks. make some excuse about my travel schedule. Alone again, Maxwell walked to the east wing of the mansion, pausing outside a closed door he seldom approached. Taking a deep breath, he entered what had once been Eliza's bedroom, preserved exactly as she had left it 20 years ago. Catherine, his wife, came here often, carefully dusting every surface and replacing the fresh flowers on the nightstand weekly. Maxwell couldn't bear to join her in this ritual of preservation, just as he couldn't bear to suggest what they both knew, that their daughter wasn't coming back to this room. Now, for the first time in years, a wild, dangerous hope had taken root in his chest. The following morning, Maxwell met with Daniel Reed, a former FBI agent turned private investigator with a reputation for handling delicate matters among New England's elite. "I want to know everything about her," Maxwell said, sliding a folder across the desk containing the basic information Olivia had compiled about Rebecca Walker. Where she comes from, how she grew up, her connection to this necklace. He placed a photograph of Eliza wearing the emerald butterfly next to the file. "And I want it handled with absolute discretion. She cannot know she's being investigated." Reed studied the photographs, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Harrington, I understand this is personal, but I should caution you against—" "I'm not paying you for caution," Maxwell interrupted, his voice sharp. "I'm paying you for information, whatever it costs." Over the next 2 weeks, Maxwell threw himself into work with an intensity that alarmed his colleagues. By day, he conducted business with machine-like precision. By night, he pored over Reed's preliminary reports. Rebecca Walker, 29, had indeed grown up in an orphanage, the Seaside Children's Home in a coastal town just 75 miles from where Eliza had disappeared. She'd been brought there at approximately age 9, after being found wandering alone on a beach, disoriented and with no memory of her life before that moment. The only possession she had was the emerald butterfly necklace. The coincidences were too striking to ignore, yet the timeline didn't quite align. If Rebecca was 29 now, she would have been 9 when she was found. But Eliza had been 13 when she vanished 20 years ago. Eliza would be 33 now. Still, Maxwell knew memory could be manipulated, records falsified. The orphanage had closed 5 years ago, its records transferred to state archives. Many pieces of the puzzle remained missing. As Maxwell drove, home along the coastal highway, the setting sun cast long shadows across the road. For 2 decades, he and Catherine had lived in a perpetual twilight of grief. Catherine had retreated into religious devotion, finding solace in the rituals and community of their Episcopal church. Maxwell had built walls around his heart and poured every ounce of his energy into his business. Neither approach had brought them peace or answers. Now, watching the ocean glitter gold in the dying light, Maxwell made a decision. He would not tell Catherine about the necklace or his investigation. Not yet. He couldn't bear to reignite her hope only to extinguish it again if he was wrong. And if he was right? What then? What would it mean for their carefully reconstructed lives? Maxwell turned into the long driveway leading to his mansion, a plan forming in his mind. He would schedule another massage appointment with Rebecca, and this time he would begin the delicate process of uncovering the truth, whatever it might be. Rebecca Walker parked her Honda Civic in the modest lot of Ocean View Apartments, her mind still puzzling over Maxwell Harrington's strange behavior. In her 3 years as a massage therapist, she'd encountered all types of clients, from chatty socialites to stoic business executives, but something about Harrington's reaction to her had felt distinctly personal, almost like recognition. Inside her one-bedroom apartment, Rebecca placed her massage table against the wall and automatically reached for the emerald butterfly necklace, a habit she'd had for as long as she could remember. The cool stone centered her, a talisman connecting her to a past that remained frustratingly out of reach. Her phone rang, displaying the Harrington Estates number. "Hello, Ms. Walker. This is Olivia Chen from Mr. Harrington's office," the crisp voice announced. "He'd like to reschedule his appointment for next Tuesday at 3 p.m., if that works with your schedule." Rebecca checked her planner. "Yes, that would be fine." After hanging up, she opened her closet and pulled out a worn shoebox from the top shelf. Inside was a collection of newspaper clippings, her private research project for the past 15 years. Headlines about missing children from coastal New England communities dating back decades. She'd been collecting them since she was 14, driven by an inexplicable compulsion to understand what had happened to her. All she knew for certain was that on September 12, 2005, a 9-year-old girl had been found wandering alone on Rockport Beach with no memory and no identification except an emerald butterfly necklace. That girl had been her. She spread the clippings across her bed, as she had hundreds of times before, searching for any connection to her own story. Among them was a faded article about Eliza Harrington, the 13-year-old daughter of prominent businessman Maxwell Harrington, who had vanished during a family vacation to Cape Cod in 2005. Rebecca had requested the case file years ago, but had been denied access. The Harrington family had been powerful enough to keep many details from the press. Now, by some twist of fate, she was scheduled to give Maxwell Harrington another massage. Her phone rang again. It was Dr. Abigail Morgan, the therapist who had been helping Rebecca work through her traumatic memory loss for the past 3 years. "Rebecca, I'm calling to confirm our session tomorrow at 4, Dr. Morgan said. "Yes, I'll be there," Rebecca replied, her eyes still fixed on the Harrington article. "Dr. Morgan, something strange happened today. I met someone who might be connected to my past." "That's significant, Rebecca. We can discuss it tomorrow. Remember our agreement. Don't pursue these connections alone. It can be destabilizing." After hanging up, Rebecca carefully returned the clippings to the shoebox but kept out the article about Eliza Harrington. There was something about the Harrington case that had always drawn her attention more strongly than the others, though she couldn't articulate why. The following Tuesday, Maxwell prepared meticulously for Rebecca's return. He'd spent the intervening week reviewing every detail of Reed's investigation and formulating his approach. "Mr. Harrington, Ms. Walker has arrived," Olivia announced. Maxwell nodded, straightening the family photograph he'd deliberately placed on his desk, a summer beach picture taken just months before Eliza's disappearance. Rebecca entered with her equipment and the same professional smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Harrington. I hope your business emergency was resolved successfully." "Yes, thank you." Maxwell gestured to the massage chair. "I appreciate your flexibility in rescheduling." As Rebecca prepared her supplies, Maxwell noticed her gaze lingering on the family photograph. "That's a lovely family portrait," she commented. "Thank you, it was taken during happier times." Maxwell paused, calculating his next words carefully. "We lost our daughter shortly after that was taken." Rebecca's hands stilled momentarily. "I'm very sorry to hear that," she said softly. "It was 20 years ago, but some wounds never fully heal." Maxwell watched her closely, searching for any reaction beyond appropriate sympathy. The massage session proceeded normally, but Maxwell strategically directed their casual conversation toward the topics that interested him. "You mentioned last time that your necklace was from before the orphanage," he said, as Rebecca worked on his lower back. "If you don't mind my asking, how did you come to be there?" Rebecca's hands maintained their rhythm, but he sensed a slight tension in her movements. "It's complicated. I don't actually remember my life before the orphanage. I was found on a beach when I was about 9 with no identification or memory. Amnesia from trauma, the doctors said." "That must have been incredibly difficult," Maxwell said, his heart racing despite his controlled tone. "It was. Still is in many ways." Rebecca shifted to work on his shoulders. "The necklace was the only connection to whoever I was before. I've tried for years to trace its origin, but it's custom-made with no maker's mark." Maxwell closed his eyes, focusing on maintaining his composure. "Have you ever considered hypnotherapy? I've heard it can be effective for retrieving lost memories." "I've tried various approaches," Rebecca replied. "My therapist believes the memories will return when I'm psychologically ready to handle them." After the session concluded, Maxwell casually mentioned, "My wife Catherine is always looking for good massage therapists. She suffers from tension headaches. Would you be interested in working with her as well?" "Of course," Rebecca replied. "That would be wonderful." As Rebecca departed, Maxwell immediately called Reed. "I need you to find out everything about her therapy, who she's seeing, what methods they're using, how long she's been going, and I want to know more about the day she was found. There must be police reports, hospital records, witness statements." "Mr. Harrington," Reed cautioned, "accessing medical records would require—" "Just get it done," Maxwell interrupted. "Whatever it takes." Catherine Harrington knelt in the small chapel attached to their mansion, her rosary beads moving steadily through her fingers. At 63, her once auburn hair had silvered completely, giving her an ethereal quality in the stained glass light. The rhythmic prayers offered what Maxwell's presence no longer could: comfort and stability. Their marriage had survived Eliza's disappearance, but barely. Where Maxwell had channeled his grief into relentless work, Catherine had turned to faith, eventually converting to Catholicism, despite Maxwell's Protestant disapproval. The chapel had been his concession to her needs, built 5 years after they lost Eliza. The door opened softly behind her. "Catherine," Maxwell said gently, "you've been in here for hours." She finished her prayer before responding. "Time passes differently in here." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Did your meeting go well?" Maxwell nodded, suddenly struck by the distance that had grown between them. Once he would have immediately shared his suspicions about Rebecca. Now they moved around each other, like cautious strangers, afraid to disturb the fragile peace they'd constructed. "I've scheduled a massage therapist for you," he said instead, "for your headaches." Catherine looked surprised by the gesture. "That's thoughtful, Maxwell. Thank you." That night, Maxwell lay awake beside his sleeping wife, his mind racing through possibilities. If Rebecca was somehow connected to Eliza's disappearance, what did that mean? Was she a victim too? A witness? Something else entirely? The next morning brought a thick manila envelope from Reed. Inside were photocopies of police reports describing the day Rebecca had been found, September 12, 2005, just 2 weeks after Eliza's disappearance on August 29th. The coincidence of timing sent a chill through Maxwell. According to witness statements, the child had been discovered by a retired couple walking their dog along Rockport Beach at dawn. She had been wearing a sundress, no shoes, and the emerald butterfly necklace. Medical examinations had found no signs of physical abuse, but her psychological state had been deeply traumatized. She couldn't recall her name, age, or any details of her life. The authorities had placed her in emergency foster care while searching for her family, but no one had ever come forward to claim her. Most disturbing was the location. Rockport Beach was less than 20 miles from where Eliza had last been seen on Cape Cod. Maxwell was so absorbed in the reports that he barely noticed Olivia entering his office until she spoke. "Mr. Harrington, your wife is on line 1. She says it's important." He picked up the phone. "Catherine?" "Maxwell." His wife's voice sounded animated in a way he hadn't heard in years. "I just had the most wonderful massage session with Rebecca Walker. There's something about her, Maxwell. Something familiar." Maxwell's grip tightened on the receiver. "What do you mean, familiar?" "I can't explain it," Catherine continued. "Just a feeling. I've invited her to join us for dinner on Friday. I hope that's all right." Maxwell stared at the police report on his desk, his thoughts whirling. "Yes," he said finally. "That sounds perfect." As he hung up, Maxwell realized the investigation had just accelerated beyond his control. Catherine had always possessed an intuition that bordered on uncanny. If she sensed something about Rebecca, perhaps he wasn't simply grasping at impossible hopes. For the first time in 20 years, Maxwell allowed himself to fully feel the dangerous emotion he'd been suppressing since seeing Rebecca's necklace. Hope. Rebecca stood before her bathroom mirror, critically assessing her appearance for the dinner at the Harrington estate. She'd changed outfits 3 times already, uncharacteristically anxious about making the right impression. What did one wear to dine with one of New England's wealthiest families? She finally settled on a simple navy blue dress, professional yet elegant. As she fastened the emerald butterfly around her neck, her fingers trembled slightly. Something about the Harringtons stirred a disquiet in her that she couldn't quite name. "You're being ridiculous," she told her reflection. "It's just dinner with clients." But she knew it wasn't that simple. Since meeting Catherine Harrington 3 days ago, Rebecca had been experiencing intensified versions of the dream that had haunted her for 20 years. Fragments of memory that dissolved upon waking, leaving only a lingering sense of loss and the sound of waves. Her phone chimed with a text from Dr. Morgan. "Remember our strategies if you feel overwhelmed tonight. Call me if needed, no matter the hour." Rebecca texted back a quick thank you, gathering her purse and keys. The drive to the Harrington estate gave her time to collect her thoughts and reinforce her professional boundaries. Whatever personal curiosity she had about the Harringtons needed to remain secondary to her work as their massage therapist. The mansion was illuminated against the darkening sky when she arrived, its windows glowing with warm light. A staff member escorted her through the grand entrance hall to a sitting room where Catherine waited. "How, Rebecca, how lovely to see you again," Catherine greeted her, elegant in a simple cream blouse and tailored pants. "Maxwell is taking a business call, but he'll join us shortly. Would you care for a drink?" "Just water, please," Rebecca replied, taking in the room's opulent details, the original artwork, antique furniture, and sweeping ocean views. Catherine handed her a crystal glass of water. "I've been looking forward to continuing our conversation from Tuesday. You mentioned you grew up near the coast?" "Yes, at Seaside Children's Home in Rockport," Rebecca confirmed, noting how Catherine's eyes seemed to study her face with unusual intensity. "Rockport is beautiful," Catherine commented. "We used to vacation in that area when—" She paused, something flickering across her expression. "When our family was younger." Rebecca felt a strange impulse to comfort this woman she barely knew. "Mrs. Harrington, please, call me Catherine," she interrupted gently. "Catherine," Rebecca amended. "Your husband mentioned you lost your daughter. I'm very sorry." Catherine nodded, her composure momentarily wavering. "Eliza. She was 13. It was during a vacation to Cape Cod. One moment she was there, playing on the beach, and the next—" Her voice trailed off, her hand instinctively reaching for a thin gold cross at her throat. Before Rebecca could respond, Maxwell entered the room. His presence immediately altered the atmosphere, bringing with it a controlled intensity that contrasted with Catherine's gentle warmth. "Miss Walker, welcome to our home," he said, his tone cordial yet measured. Dinner was served in a formal dining room overlooking the ocean. As the meal progressed, Rebecca found herself increasingly aware of Maxwell's calculated questions about her background, education, and career path. Where Catherine's interest seemed genuine, Maxwell's felt almost strategic, as though he were assembling pieces of a puzzle. "Your work at the Children's Hospital must be rewarding," Catherine commented as they enjoyed a dessert of poached pears. Rebecca nodded. "It is. Children respond so well to therapeutic touch. It helps them process trauma in ways talk therapy alone sometimes can't." "Trauma," Maxwell repeated, setting down his fork. "Like what you experienced as a child." The directness of his question caught Rebecca off guard. Yes, I suppose that's partly why I'm drawn to that work." "I hope you don't mind my asking," Maxwell continued, his gaze intent, "but have you ever made progress in recovering your memories from before you were found?" Catherine shot her husband a warning glance. "Maxwell, that's rather personal." "It's all right," Rebecca assured her, though she wondered at Maxwell's particular interest. "It's complicated. I get fragments sometimes. Sensations more than concrete memories. The sound of waves. A feeling of being safe, and then suddenly not. The therapists who worked with me as a child believed I experienced something traumatic that caused my mind to protect itself by erasing what came before." "And the necklace?" Maxwell pressed. "You've never discovered its origin?" Rebecca's hand moved instinctively to touch the emerald butterfly. "No. I've researched custom jewelry designers, particularly those who worked with butterfly motifs, but I've never found a match. The craftsmanship is exceptional. Whoever made it was a master." Maxwell exchanged a look with Catherine that Rebecca couldn't interpret. After dinner, Catherine suggested a tour of the grounds. The night was clear, with a full moon silvering the ocean beyond the cliffs. As they walked along a garden path, Catherine gently steered the conversation toward more personal territory. Do you have family now, Rebecca? People who became your family after the orphanage? Margaret Fisher, the woman who fostered me as a teenager, is the closest thing I have to family, Rebecca replied. She still lives in Rockport, making and selling handcrafted jewelry to tourists. Jewelry? Maxwell asked sharply. What kind? Mostly simple pieces with sea glass and shells, Rebecca explained, puzzled by his reaction. Nothing as fine as this. She touched her necklace again. As they rounded a corner in the garden path, they came upon a small stone memorial nestled among flowering shrubs. A marble plaque read simply, Eliza Ann Harrington, 1992-2005, forever in our hearts. We needed somewhere to come, Catherine explained softly, noticing Rebecca's gaze. Without a grave. Rebecca felt a sudden wave of dizziness, a pressure building behind her eyes. Fragments of a memory flashed, sunlight on water, laughter, the sensation of cool metal against skin. Rebecca? Catherine's concerned voice seemed to come from far away. Are you all right? I'm sorry, Rebecca managed, steadying herself against a stone bench. Just a headache coming on. Would you mind if I use your restroom? Catherine immediately led her back toward the house, while Maxwell followed silently, his expression unreadable. Inside, Rebecca excused herself to the bathroom, locking the door and leaning heavily against the sink. Her reflection in the mirror looked pale, almost ghostly. What was happening to her? Why did this family affect her so strongly? Taking deep breaths to center herself, Rebecca noticed a family photograph on the wall. Maxwell, Catherine, and a young girl with auburn hair wearing a familiar emerald butterfly necklace around her neck. Rebecca froze, staring at the image. The necklace in the photograph was identical to hers. Not similar, not reminiscent, but exactly the same unique piece she'd worn for 20 years. Her hands shaking, she removed her own necklace and held it beside the photograph, comparing every detail. The truth hit her with physical force. Her necklace had once belonged to the Harringtons' missing daughter. A soft knock at the door startled her. Rebecca, are you okay? Catherine called. Just a moment, Rebecca called back, quickly replacing her necklace and splashing cold water on her face. When she emerged, both Harringtons were waiting in the hallway, their expressions a study in contrasts, Catherine openly concerned, Maxwell watchful and contained. I'm so sorry, Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady. I think I need to go home. I suddenly don't feel well. Of course, Catherine said immediately. Maxwell will have Thomas drive you. That's not necessary, Rebecca protested. I can drive myself. I insist, Maxwell said, his tone brooking no argument. You shouldn't drive if you're unwell. As their driver prepared to take her home, Rebecca overheard Catherine speaking quietly to Maxwell in the foyer. Did you see her reaction at the memorial? Maxwell, there's something there. I can feel it. We need to be careful, Catherine. Maxwell responded in a low voice. We can't rush this. Rush what? Rebecca wondered, her mind racing with implications. Did they suspect what she had just discovered? Were they watching her because they somehow recognized their daughter's necklace? In the back seat of the Harringtons' luxury sedan, Rebecca stared out at the passing coastline, her thoughts churning. If her necklace had belonged to Eliza Harrington, what did that mean? Had she somehow been involved in the girl's disappearance? The possibility made her feel physically ill. By the time she reached her apartment, Rebecca had made a decision. She needed answers, for her own peace of mind, and possibly for the Harringtons as well. Whatever connection existed between her past and their lost daughter, she had to understand it. She called Dr. Morgan, who answered despite the late hour. I need to accelerate our memory work, Rebecca said without preamble. I'm ready to try the regression hypnotherapy you suggested. Rebecca, we've discussed this, Dr. Morgan cautioned. Rushing the process could be destabilizing. I know the risks, Rebecca insisted, but something's happened. I think my past might be connected to a missing child case. I can't explain how I know, but I do. This isn't just about me anymore. There was a long pause before Dr. Morgan responded. Come to my office tomorrow morning at 8. But Rebecca, please be prepared. What you remember may not be what you want to find." After hanging up, Rebecca returned to her shoebox of newspaper clippings, spreading them across her kitchen table. The article about Eliza Harrington's disappearance contained few details, but one sentence jumped out at her now. The 13-year-old was last seen wearing a custom emerald butterfly necklace, a birthday gift from her father. Rebecca touched her own necklace, a chill running through her. How had she ended up with Eliza's necklace? What had happened on that beach 20 years ago? As she finally fell into an uneasy sleep, her dreams were more vivid than ever. Waves crashing, two girls laughing, running along a beach, a sudden terror, and then darkness. Meanwhile, in their mansion overlooking the sea, Maxwell finally revealed to Catherine what he'd suspected since first seeing Rebecca's necklace. Catherine's reaction moved from disbelief to cautious hope as he shared Reed's findings and his own observations. "Why didn't you tell me immediately?" Catherine demanded, tears streaming down her face. "I needed to be sure before giving you false hope," Maxwell explained, "and I'm still not sure. The age doesn't match, Catherine. If Rebecca is 29 now, she would have been 9 when found, not 13 like Eliza." "Records can be wrong," Catherine insisted. "Trauma can affect appearance, development." "Maxwell, you saw how she reacted at the memorial. And the necklace. How do you explain the necklace?" Maxwell had no answer. Instead, he placed a call to Reed, instructing him to intensify the investigation. "I want to know every detail about her therapy sessions, who she's seeing, what methods they're using, and I want DNA samples, discreetly obtained." As he hung up, he found Catherine watching him with an expression he hadn't seen in decades, hope mingled with determination. "We're going to find the truth," she said, not a question but a statement of fact. "After all these years, we're finally going to know what happened to our daughter." Dr. Abigail Morgan's office occupied the 3rd floor of a Victorian house in downtown Newport, its bay windows overlooking the harbor. At precisely 8 o'clock, Rebecca settled into the familiar leather armchair across from her therapist, her exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "Before we begin," Dr. Morgan said, her calm voice anchoring Rebecca as it had for 3 years, "I want to make sure you understand what we're attempting today. Hypnotic regression isn't magical access to perfect memories. It's a tool that may help you access fragments you've suppressed, but those fragments may be distorted by time, trauma, and subsequent experiences." Rebecca nodded. "I understand the limitations, but I need to try. I need to know if I'm somehow connected to Eliza Harrington's disappearance." Dr. Morgan's expression remained professional, but her eyes reflected concern. "You mentioned a connection to a missing child case. Would you explain that before we proceed?" Rebecca removed her necklace, placing it on the small table between them. "This necklace, the only possession I had when I was found wandering on that beach 20 years ago, belonged to Eliza Harrington. I saw a photograph of her wearing it in the Harrington home last night." Dr. Morgan studied the emerald butterfly, her forehead creasing slightly. "That is significant. But Rebecca, having her necklace doesn't necessarily mean you were involved in her disappearance. There could be many explanations." "That's why I'm here," Rebecca said firmly. "To find the truth, whatever it is." The hypnosis session began with Dr. Morgan's gentle guidance, leading Rebecca into a deeply relaxed state where the barriers between conscious and subconscious might become more permeable. For nearly 30 minutes, they made little progress, with Rebecca remaining aware of the office around her, unable to access deeper memories. Then, as Dr. Morgan directed her attention to the sensation of the necklace against her skin, something shifted. Rebecca's breathing changed, becoming shallower and more rapid. "I can see water," she whispered. "The ocean. I'm on a beach." "Are you alone?" Dr. Morgan asked softly. "No. There's another girl, older than me. She's laughing, showing me something. She found a perfect sand dollar." Rebecca's face softened into a child's expression of wonder. "She puts it in my hand. says I can keep it. Do you know this girl? A frown crossed Rebecca's face. I think she's my cousin, but we don't see each other much. This is special, a vacation together. What happens next, Rebecca? Rebecca's breathing quickened again, her hands gripping the armrests. We're not supposed to go this far down. The beach. The adults said to stay where they could see us. But she wants to explore the tide pools around the point. And do you go? Yes. Rebecca's voice had taken on a childish quality. She's wearing her butterfly necklace, the one her daddy gave her. I wish I had something so pretty. She sees me looking at it and takes it off. Says I can wear it for a while, that it'll be our secret. Dr. Morgan leaned forward slightly. What's her name, Rebecca? Can you remember the girl's name? Rebecca's face contorted with effort. Lizzie? No, that's not right. Eliza. Her name is Eliza. The revelation hung in the air between them, confirmation of a connection that changed everything. Dr. Morgan maintained her professional composure, guiding the session forward with careful questions. What happens after Eliza gives you her necklace to wear? Rebecca's body tensed, her breathing becoming erratic. Someone's watching us from the trees beyond the beach. Eliza doesn't see him, but I do. A man with a hat pulled low. What does the man do? He's coming toward us. Eliza sees him now. She grabs my hand, says we need to run. Rebecca's voice rose in pitch, taking on the terrified tone of a child. We're running, but the sand makes it hard. Eliza falls. I try to help her up. Rebecca's face contorted in distress, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks. The man is there. Eliza screams at me to run, to get help. I'm so scared. I run toward the rocks. I hear Eliza screaming behind me. Dr. Morgan intervened gently. You're safe here, Rebecca. This is just a memory. What happens next? I'm climbing the rocks, trying to hide. I slip. Pain. Everything goes dark. Rebecca's breathing became shallow and rapid. Water. I wake up with water around me. It's dark now. I'm on a different beach. The necklace is still around my neck. I'm cold, so cold I can't remember who I am. Dr. Morgan carefully guided Rebecca through the rest of the session, bringing her back to full consciousness gradually. When Rebecca finally opened her eyes, she looked shaken to her core. I was there, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I was with Eliza when she disappeared. It appears so, Dr. Morgan confirmed gently. But Rebecca, you were a child yourself, likely in shock and injured. You didn't cause what happened. Rebecca's hands trembled as she reached for the emerald butterfly necklace. All these years, I've been wearing the necklace of a girl who might have been taken because I ran away instead of helping her. You did exactly what Eliza told you to do, Dr. Morgan insisted. You were a child trying to get help. They spent the next hour processing the fragments of memory that had emerged, with Dr. Morgan cautioning that more sessions would be needed to develop a complete understanding of what had happened. What do I do about the Harringtons? Rebecca asked finally. Do I tell them what I've remembered? Dr. Morgan considered the question carefully. That's ultimately your decision, Rebecca, but these memories are still fragmented and may evolve with further sessions. Perhaps wait until we have a clearer picture. Rebecca nodded, gathering her things to leave. As she reached the door, Dr. Morgan added, Rebecca, please call me anytime today if you feel overwhelmed. Recovering traumatic memories can be destabilizing. Outside, the late morning sun seemed unnaturally bright, the world continuing its normal rhythms despite the seismic shift in Rebecca's understanding of herself. She walked aimlessly along the harbor, her mind replaying the fragments of memory over and over. She had been with Eliza Harrington. They had been cousins. The realization struck her with new force. If they were cousins, then the Harringtons were her family too. But how was that possible? Maxwell had a brother who had passed away years before Eliza's disappearance, according to an old newspaper article she'd read. She pulled out her phone, searching for information about the Harrington family tree. A business profile of Maxwell mentioned his late brother, James Harrington, who had died in a sailing accident in 1996. Could James have been her father? The timeline would fit. She would have been around 1 year old when he passed away. Her Phone rang, displaying the Harrington Estates number. Rebecca hesitated before answering. "Hello?" "Rebecca, it's Catherine Harrington." The woman's warm voice held a note of concern. "I wanted to check on you after last night. Are you feeling better?" "Yes, thank you," Rebecca replied automatically, her mind racing. Should she say something now? The memory fragments were too incomplete, too unreliable to share. "I'm so glad. We enjoyed your company very much and hoped perhaps you might join us again this weekend. There's a local maritime festival in Newport that's quite lovely." Rebecca hesitated only briefly. "I'd like that. Thank you." After hanging up, Rebecca made a decision. Before seeing the Harringtons again, she needed to visit the one person who might have answers about her early childhood. Margaret Fisher, the woman who had fostered her as a teenager after the orphanage, proved unable to manage her psychological issues. Maxwell paced his home office, his patience wearing thin as he waited for Reed's call. Catherine sat in a leather armchair by the window, her rosary beads moving through her fingers, a habit that had once irritated Maxwell, but that he now recognized as her way of managing anxiety. "She remembered something last night," Catherine said quietly. "I saw it in her face when we showed her the memorial garden. Something about Eliza affected her deeply." Maxwell nodded. "Reed's investigating her therapy sessions. He's found out she's seeing Dr. Abigail Morgan, a specialist in trauma and memory recovery. Is that ethical?" Catherine questioned, her moral compass still strong despite her desperate hope. Before Maxwell could respond, his phone rang. "Reed," he answered brusquely. "What have you found?" Maxwell's expression shifted as he listened, moving from expectation to confusion to shock. "Are you absolutely certain?" he demanded. "Triple-check those results." Hanging up, he turned to Catherine, his face pale. "The DNA test results are back. Rebecca Walker is not our daughter." Catherine's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "Then we were wrong? The necklace was just a coincidence?" "No," Maxwell said, dropping heavily into his chair. "The necklace can't be a coincidence. It was custom-made, one of a kind." He took a deep breath. "And the DNA test showed something else. Rebecca is related to us. The genetic markers indicate a first-cousin relationship to Eliza." Catherine stared at him, processing the implications. "But that would mean she's James's daughter," Maxwell finished, naming his long-deceased brother. "Somehow James had a daughter we never knew about, a daughter who was with Eliza the day she vanished." The realization sent them both into stunned silence. James Harrington had been the family's black sheep, brilliant but reckless, more interested in sailing and women than the family business. His death in a sailing accident had been a tragedy, but not entirely unexpected, given his risk-taking nature. "But how?" Catherine finally asked. "Why wouldn't James have told us he had a child?" "You know how he was," Maxwell replied, memories of his charismatic, troubled brother surfacing. Responsibilities were never his strong suit. But if Rebecca and Eliza were together when Eliza disappeared, he didn't need to finish the thought. They both understood the implication. Rebecca might be the key to finally discovering what had happened to their daughter. The coastal road to Rockport curved along cliffs and beaches, offering spectacular views that Rebecca barely noticed as she drove north. Her mind was too consumed with questions spawned by her hypnosis session, questions she hoped Margaret Fisher might help answer. Rockport was a postcard-perfect New England seaside town, its harbor filled with fishing boats and surrounded by colorful shops catering to summer tourists. In late September, the crowds had thinned, leaving the town to its year-round residents. Margaret's shop, Sea Glass Treasures, occupied a small storefront near the harbor. A bell tinkled as Rebecca pushed open the door, inhaling the familiar scent of sea salt and lavender that Margaret infused into the space. "Rebecca," the silver-haired woman looked up from her workbench, delight spreading across her weathered face. At 72, Margaret remained robust and sharp, her artist's hands steady as they crafted jewelry from beach treasures. What a wonderful surprise! Rebecca embraced the woman who had taken in a troubled 14-year-old when no one else would. providing the stability that had allowed Rebecca to eventually heal enough to live independently. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Nothing more important than you," Margaret assured her, flipping the shop sign to closed and locking the door. "Come upstairs, I'll make tea." The apartment above the shop was as familiar to Rebecca as her own, the colorful quilts, driftwood sculptures, and walls of books creating a cozy haven. She settled onto a worn sofa while Margaret prepared tea in the tiny kitchen. "So," Margaret said, returning with 2 steaming mugs, "what brings you all the way up from Newport on a Thursday?" "Not that I'm complaining." Rebecca wrapped her hands around the warm mug, drawing courage from its comfort. "I've remembered something, Margaret. About before. About the day I was found." Margaret's expression grew serious. "Oh, sweetheart. That's significant. Good or bad?" "Both, I think." Rebecca hesitated, then removed the emerald butterfly necklace. "This belonged to a girl named Eliza Harrington. She was my cousin. We were together on the beach the day she disappeared." Margaret set her tea down carefully. "The Harrington case? That was huge news back then. The whole coast was searching for that poor child." "I was there," Rebecca continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been working for the Harringtons. Maxwell and Catherine, they recognized the necklace." "Oh, Rebecca." Margaret reached for her hand. That's extraordinary." "There's more." Rebecca took a deep breath. "I think James Harrington might have been my father, Maxwell's brother." Margaret's reaction was subtle but unmistakable, a tightening around her eyes, a quickening of breath. She knew something. "Margaret," Rebecca pressed, "did you know about this? About my connection to the Harringtons?" The older woman sighed deeply, rising to retrieve a wooden box from a high shelf. "I had suspicions, but nothing concrete. When you came to live with me, I did some research on my own, trying to help you find answers." She opened the box, removing a yellowed newspaper clipping, an obituary for James Harrington from 1996. The timing fit. You would have been about a year old when he died, and there were rumors about James having a relationship with a local artist named Diana Walker. "Walker," Rebecca repeated, stunned. "My last name." Margaret nodded. "The orphanage assigned you that name because you were found walking on the beach. Just a coincidence. But when I discovered there had been an artist named Diana Walker who disappeared around 1996, leaving behind a small child who was then adopted, well, I wondered." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Rebecca asked, struggling to process this new information. "Because it was just a theory, dear. Without proof, I was afraid of sending you on a painful wild goose chase." Margaret sighed. "And truthfully, the Harringtons are powerful people. If they hadn't acknowledged you as family before, I worried about what rejection might do to you." Rebecca's mind raced through implications. "So my mother might have been this Diana Walker. What happened to her? And how did I end up with Eliza that day on the beach if the Harringtons didn't know about me?" "Those are the missing pieces," Margaret acknowledged. "I never found anything definitive about Diana after 1996. As for how you ended up with Eliza," she shrugged helplessly. Rebecca stared out the window at the harbor, watching fishing boats return with their day's catch. "I need to tell the Harringtons what I've remembered. They've been searching for answers about Eliza for 20 years. "Are you sure that's wise?" Margaret asked gently. "Your memories are just beginning to return. They're fragmented, possibly unreliable." "They deserve to know," Rebecca insisted, "and I need answers too. If I'm really James Harrington's daughter, they're my family, the only blood relatives I have." Margaret studied her face thoughtfully. "You've grown into such a strong woman." "Rebecca, whatever you decide, I'm here for you." She hesitated before adding, "There's something else you should know. After you were found, before they placed you at Seaside, there was a woman who came looking for you at the hospital." Rebecca tensed. "A woman? Who?" No one knew. She claimed to be a distant relative, but she couldn't provide any verification. The authorities were suspicious and denied her access. She never returned. "Did anyone describe her, get her name?" Margaret shook her head. "Only that she was middle-aged, well-dressed, and seemed very determined to see you. I only learned about this years later, from a nurse who remembered the case. Rebecca touched her necklace, the pieces of her past, still a scattered puzzle. I'm having dinner with the Harringtons again on Saturday. I think I'll tell them then about the memories about being James's daughter. If they already know from their investigation, at least I'll be honest about what I know too. The Harrington estate was being transformed for Saturday's dinner party when Maxwell received the unexpected call from his private investigator. "She's in Rockport," Reed reported, "visiting a woman named Margaret Fisher, the foster mother who took her in as a teenager. She left Dr. Morgan's office this morning and drove straight there." Maxwell's grip tightened on his phone. She's remembered something. That has to be it. He hesitated, calculating his next move. Stay on her, but maintain distance. I don't want her spooked. Catherine entered his office as he hung up, her expression concerned. "You're having her followed?" "Maxwell, if she truly is James's daughter, this isn't how we should treat family." "We don't know what her intentions are," Maxwell replied defensively. "She's had Eliza's necklace all these years and never came forward." "She didn't know," Catherine exclaimed. "She was a traumatized child with amnesia. How could she possibly have known?" Maxwell sighed, the weight of 20 years of grief and unanswered questions bearing down on him. "You're right, of course you're right." He ran a hand through his silver hair. "It's just being this close to answers after so long." Catherine placed a gentle hand on his arm. "I understand. But Rebecca is a victim in this too. Whatever happened that day, she was only a child. James's child, our niece. I've spent 2 decades building psychological walls to contain this grief," Maxwell admitted quietly. "I'm not sure I know how to dismantle them now." Catherine's eyes softened. "With compassion. 1 brick at a time, my dear. Just like we've done with everything else." Maxwell nodded, making a decision. "Call Edward Sullivan." Catherine's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Your brother-in-law? Why?" "If Rebecca is James's daughter, he might know something. Diana Walker was his sister's friend, if I remember correctly." The call to Edward Sullivan, husband of Maxwell's late sister, proved illuminating. Though initially confused by the inquiry, Edward confirmed that Diana Walker had indeed been close friends with Maxwell's sister, Marie. "Diana and James?" Edward sounded surprised at the connection. "I suppose it's possible. She was a free spirit like James, but I didn't know they were involved romantically." "Did you know she had a child?" Maxwell pressed. "I heard something about that, yes, after she moved away. There were rumors she'd had James's baby, but since he had already passed by then, well, it seemed like painful gossip to bring up to your family." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. If Diana had been close to Marie, it would explain how Rebecca might have ended up at the Cape Cod vacation house with Eliza. Diana might have brought her daughter to visit Marie, creating an opportunity for the cousins to meet. But why had no one in the family acknowledged Diana or her child after James died? And why had Diana apparently disappeared, leaving her daughter to be adopted? Maxwell shared these developments with Catherine, both of them struggling to reconstruct a history they'd never known existed. Marie died just a year after James, Catherine remembered. Maybe she was the only one who knew about Diana and the child, with both James and Marie gone. The connection was lost, Maxwell finished, until Rebecca appeared with Eliza's necklace 20 years later. Their contemplation was interrupted by Olivia, who appeared at the office doorway. "Mr. Harrington, the caterers need your approval on the menu for Saturday. And Mrs. Harrington, the florist, is online too." The dinner party preparations provided a welcome distraction from the emotional turmoil of their discoveries. Catherine had invited 20 guests, close friends and associates who had supported them through the years after Eliza's disappearance. "Are you sure about including Rebecca in such a large gathering?" Maxwell asked as they reviewed the seating chart. "It might be overwhelming for her." "I thought about that," Catherine admitted, "but it's the Maritime Festival weekend. It would seem strange not to include her in our annual party. Besides, having others present might make it easier for her to feel comfortable with us." Maxwell wasn't convinced, but he trusted Catherine's social instincts more than his own. That evening, as a spectacular sunset painted the sky over the Atlantic. Maxwell stood alone on the cliff edge of their property, staring out at the eternal rhythm of the waves. 20 years ago, the ocean had taken his daughter and left behind a mystery that had consumed his life. Now it seemed the same waters might be returning answers through Rebecca. But answers brought their own complications. If Rebecca's recovered, memories confirmed what they suspected, that Eliza had been taken by someone while Rebecca escaped. What then? Would knowing finally bring closure, or would it only sharpen the pain of their loss? And what of Rebecca herself? She was family. James's daughter, their niece, a young woman who had suffered trauma and loss, who had grown up without knowing her true identity or family connections. What did they owe her now? For a man accustomed to controlling every variable in his business and personal life, these questions represented terrifying uncertainty. Behind him, the mansion's lights created a golden glow in the gathering dusk. Inside, Catherine would be in her element, finalizing details for Saturday's event with elegant efficiency. Their carefully constructed life continued its familiar patterns while beneath the surface. Everything was changing. Maxwell took a deep breath of salt air, steeling himself for whatever revelations the weekend might bring. After 20 years of searching for his daughter, he would finally learn the truth. Whether that truth would heal or destroy what remained of his family remained to be seen. As he turned back toward the house, his phone buzzed with a text from Reed. Subject returning to Newport. Appears distressed, proceeding with surveillance as instructed. Maxwell stared at the message, a sudden surge of protectiveness surprising him. This was no anonymous subject. This was his brother's daughter, a young woman who carried her own scars from that tragic day at the beach. He texted back a new instruction: discontinue surveillance, return to office. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he sent a message to Rebecca's number. Catherine and I are looking forward to seeing you on Saturday. Drive safely. It was a small gesture, but perhaps a first step toward whatever new relationship awaited them, not as suspicious employer and employee, but as family connected by both tragedy and blood. The Maritime Festival transformed Newport's waterfront into a celebration of the town's seafaring heritage. Tall ships lined the harbor, their masts festooned with colorful flags. The scent of fried seafood and the sound of folk music filled the air as locals and tourists alike enjoyed the perfect early autumn weather. Rebecca wandered through the festivities Saturday afternoon, trying to calm her nerves before the evening's dinner party at the Harrington estate. The text from Maxwell had surprised her, a small kindness she hadn't expected from the stern businessman. It suggested he knew more than he was letting on, perhaps even about her visit to Margaret. She paused at a vendor selling handcrafted jewelry, her eyes drawn to a simple sea glass pendant. The artisan, an older woman with sun-weathered skin, smiled at her interest. "That one's special," the woman said. "The sea glass is over 100 years old, from a shipwreck off the coast." "It's beautiful," Rebecca replied, fingering her own emerald butterfly. "Things that survive the ocean's power often are. Some say the sea never truly takes anything," the woman offered philosophically. "It just holds things for a while before returning them, changed but not destroyed." The words resonated with Rebecca as she continued through the festival. Perhaps that was her role in the Harrington tragedy. Not a lost daughter returned, but a witness, finally washed ashore with fragments of truth. By late afternoon, she returned to her apartment to prepare for the evening. She chose a simple emerald green dress that complemented her necklace, the symbolism of the color choice not lost on her. Tonight, she would finally share what she knew with the Harringtons. Tonight, the emerald butterfly would come full circle. The Harrington mansion glowed with lights as Rebecca drove through the gates at 7 o'clock. Cars lined the circular driveway. Clearly, this was not the intimate dinner she had expected, but a larger gathering. Her stomach tightened with anxiety at the prospect of navigating social niceties while carrying such profound revelations. A valet took her keys, and Catherine greeted her in the grand foyer, elegant in a navy blue evening dress. "Rebecca, I'm so glad you could come." Catherine's warm embrace felt different now that Rebecca understood their connection. This was her aunt, her father's sister-in-law. I hope you don't mind the crowd. We host this dinner every year during the Maritime Festival. It's fine, Rebecca assured her, though her palms were damp with nervousness. Thank you for including me. Catherine led her through to a spacious living room where about 20 guests mingled, cocktails in hand. Maxwell stood near the fireplace, deep in conversation with an older gentleman, but his eyes found Rebecca immediately as she entered. Most of these people have been friends for decades, Catherine explained quietly. Many supported us through difficult times. Rebecca nodded, understanding the implication. These were people who had stood by the Harringtons after Eliza's disappearance. Maxwell excused himself from his conversation and approached them, his expression inscrutable. Rebecca, welcome. That color suits you. Thank you, she replied, acutely aware of the necklace resting against her collarbone. It seemed appropriate. A fleeting look of understanding passed between them before Maxwell was called away by another guest. Catherine introduced Rebecca to several people, describing her simply as our wonderful massage therapist, rather than making any reference to family connections. During dinner, Rebecca was seated between an elderly judge and a woman who ran the local historical society. The conversation flowed around her, talk of the festival, local politics, and reminiscences of past Newport seasons, while she picked at her salmon, waiting for an opportunity to speak privately with the Harringtons. As dessert was being served, a sudden summer squall blew in from the ocean. Rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled across the bay. Several guests expressed concern about driving home in the storm. No one should leave until it passes, Catherine declared. Maxwell, perhaps you could show everyone the new art installation in the gallery while we wait? Maxwell nodded, leading most of the guests toward another wing of the mansion. Catherine touched Rebecca's arm lightly. Would you help me check that all the windows are closed in the solarium? I'm worried about the orchids. Rebecca followed Catherine through the quiet kitchen into a glass-enclosed room filled with exotic plants. The rain drummed against the glass ceiling, creating a strangely intimate atmosphere despite the storm's violence. I thought we might find a moment to talk, Catherine said quietly, checking a window latch. You've seemed preoccupied all evening. Rebecca took a deep breath. I have something to tell you and Maxwell. Something important about the past. Catherine's hand stilled on the window. We have something to tell you as well. She turned to face Rebecca fully. Maxwell had you investigated after seeing your necklace. We know you're James's daughter. The directness of the statement momentarily took Rebecca's breath away. You know, how long have you... Only a few days, Catherine assured her. DNA tests confirmed it. You're our niece, Rebecca. Despite having come to the same conclusion herself, hearing Catherine say it made the reality hit home with new force. I've remembered things too, Rebecca said. About the day Eliza disappeared, I was there with her. Catherine's eyes widened, her composure slipping for the first time that evening. You remember? What happened? Please, Rebecca. I've only recovered fragments, Rebecca cautioned. Through hypnotherapy. Eliza and I were cousins, but we didn't know each other well. It was a special vacation together. We were on the beach and she let me wear her necklace. Then a man approached us. The solarium door opened and Maxwell stood framed in the doorway, his expression tense. Catherine? Rebecca? Everyone's asking for you. Maxwell, Catherine said, her voice trembling slightly. Rebecca remembers being with Eliza that day. She was starting to tell me what happened. Maxwell closed the door behind him, his attention now entirely focused on Rebecca. You remember? Tell us everything, please. Rebecca recounted what she had recovered in her session with Dr. Morgan. The beach, the necklace, the man approaching, Eliza telling her to run for help, her fall on the rocks, and waking up on another beach with no memory. Maxwell listened, intently, his jaw tightening at the mention of the unidentified man. Did you see his face, anything that could identify him? Rebecca shook her head. Just that he wore a hat pulled low. Eliza recognized him though, I think. She seemed more afraid than surprised. Catherine sank onto a bench among the orchids, tears streaming silently down her face. All these years, we never knew what happened. The police investigated everyone, the ground staff, local fishermen, even families vacationing nearby. There was never a solid lead. "There's something else you should know," Maxwell said, his voice controlled, despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "We've been looking into your mother, Diana Walker. She was friends with my sister, Marie." "Margaret told me about Diana," Rebecca said, "but she disappeared around 1996, right? When James died." Maxwell nodded. "After James's sailing accident, Diana seemed to vanish. We now believe she left you with an adoptive family and moved abroad. Marie might have been the only one who knew about you, and she passed away a year after James." "But why was I with Eliza that day?" Rebecca pressed. "If you didn't know about me?" "We think Diana might have brought you to visit Marie at our Cape Cod house," Catherine explained. "Marie was staying there that summer with Eliza. Maxwell and I were only there on weekends. That weekend," Maxwell's voice caught slightly, "I was supposed to be there, but a business emergency kept me in Boston. Catherine had gone ahead with Eliza. Marie was there too. Diana must have brought you for a visit, and then—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Rebecca understood. If he had been there that weekend, perhaps everything would have been different. A crack of lightning illuminated the solarium, followed by a house-shaking boom of thunder. The lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging them into darkness broken only by occasional flashes from the storm. "The generator should kick in soon," Maxwell said calmly. In the strange, intermittent lightning, Rebecca saw Catherine's tear-streaked face and Maxwell's rigid posture with new clarity. These people were her family. They had suffered an unimaginable loss, and she held pieces of the truth they had sought for 20 years. "I have more sessions scheduled with Dr. Morgan," she said into the darkness. "More memories might return. I want to help you find answers about Eliza." "Rebecca," Catherine's voice was soft but steady, "whatever happened that day, please know that we don't blame you. You were a child just like Eliza." The backup generator hummed to life, gradually restoring dim lighting to the solarium. In that gentle illumination, Rebecca saw Maxwell struggling with emotion, his perfectionist's composure finally cracking. "I've spent 20 years building walls around this pain," he said, his voice rough, "running from it by burying myself in work, convincing myself that certainty would never come." He met Rebecca's eyes directly. "Now you've appeared with my daughter's necklace and memories of that day, and those walls are crumbling." "I'm sorry," Rebecca said, unsure if her presence brought comfort or fresh pain. "Don't be," Catherine interjected firmly. "Finding you, knowing you're James's daughter, it's like having a piece of him back. And now, maybe, we'll finally learn what happened to Eliza too." A discreet knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Olivia appeared, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but your guests are asking about dessert, and some are preparing to leave now that the power's back." Maxwell straightened, his public facade slipping back into place. "Of course, we'll be right there." As Catherine moved to follow Olivia, Maxwell hesitated, turning back to Rebecca. "Stay after the others leave. There's more we should discuss." Rebecca nodded, her mind spinning with the evening's revelations. By 11 o'clock, the last guests had departed, leaving the three Harringtons, for Rebecca now understood that's what she was, alone in the grand living room. A fire crackled in the fireplace, pushing back the chill left by the passing storm. Maxwell poured brandies for the three of them, then settled beside Catherine on the sofa. "We need to discuss what happens next," he said, the businessman in him seeking structure even in this emotional territory. "I want to continue the memory recovery sessions," Rebecca said firmly. "Dr. Morgan believes more details might return with time." "We'd like to support that process however we can," Catherine said. "And we'd like to get to know you, Rebecca, not as our massage therapist, but as our niece, as family." The word family resonated through Rebecca like a bell tone. Family, the thing she had sought all her life without even realizing it. "I'd like that too," she admitted. "But there's something I need to ask. The necklace, Eliza's necklace. Should I return it to you?" Maxwell and Catherine exchanged a look of silent communication. "No," Maxwell said finally. "She gave it to you that day. She would want you to have it." "There's something else to consider," Maxwell continued, setting his brandy aside. "The investigation into Eliza's disappearance. With your memories returning, we might have cause to reopen the case." After all this time, Rebecca questioned. There's no statute of limitations, Maxwell explained. And with a new witness, you coming forward with recovered memories, the police would have to investigate. Are you ready for that? Catherine asked gently. It would mean police interviews, possible media attention, revisiting trauma. Rebecca considered the question seriously. I think I need time to recover more memories, to be more certain of what I saw. And, frankly, to adjust to discovering who I really am. That's completely understandable, Catherine assured her. Maxwell leaned forward, his expression earnest. Rebecca, whatever you decide about the investigation, I want you to know that we consider you family now. I've instructed our attorneys to update our family trust to include you. That's not necessary, Rebecca protested, overwhelmed by the gesture. It is to us, Maxwell insisted. You're James's daughter. What's ours would have been partially his, and now it should partially be yours. What Maxwell is trying to say, Catherine interjected with gentle understanding, is that finding you feels like a gift amid all the loss. We don't want to lose you again. Rebecca felt tears welling in her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll give us a chance to be the family we should have been all along, Catherine suggested, reaching for Rebecca's hand. As Rebecca drove home in the pre-dawn hours, the rain had cleared to reveal a sky filled with stars. The ocean glittered. Beneath the moonlight, the same eternal waters that had carried her away from Eliza 20 years ago and now had somehow brought her back to the Harringtons. She touched the emerald butterfly at her throat, feeling its familiar contours. It was no longer just a mysterious connection to an unknown past, but a tangible link to Eliza, the cousin she had briefly known, whose fate still remained a mystery. The following week brought a whirlwind of changes. Rebecca continued her sessions with Dr. Morgan, each one bringing back more fragments of memory. Maxwell arranged for the Newport Police Department to interview her, reopening Eliza's case with the new information she provided. A careful search of old records revealed something the original investigation had missed. Reports of a sailboat, seen leaving the area around the time of Eliza's disappearance, registered to a former groundskeeper at the Harringtons' summer home who had been dismissed months earlier for inappropriate behavior. The authorities were now actively searching for this man, who had disappeared soon after Eliza had vanished. On a crisp October morning, 1 month after Rebecca had first entered Maxwell's office wearing the emerald butterfly, she stood with the Harringtons on Rockport Beach, near where she had been found 20 years earlier. The annual Blessing of the Waters ceremony was underway, a local tradition where residents cast white flowers into the sea as offerings for the safety of sailors and the return of lost loved ones. This feels right, Catherine said, clutching a bouquet of white lilies. Being here together, where your journey back to us began. Maxwell nodded, his arm around his wife's shoulders. The past month had softened something in him, Catherine had told Rebecca privately. He smiled more, worked less obsessively, and had even joined Catherine in Eliza's room to help replace the preserved shrine with a more peaceful memorial space. Ready? Maxwell asked, looking at both women. Together they walked to the water's edge. Catherine cast her lilies into the gentle waves first, whispering a prayer as they floated away. Maxwell followed with his own flowers, his expression contemplative but peaceful. Rebecca stepped forward last, the emerald butterfly gleaming at her throat in the autumn sunlight. She held her white roses for a moment, gathering her thoughts. For Eliza, she said softly, releasing the flowers, and for the little girl I was, who found her way home at last. As the roses drifted out with the tide, Rebecca felt a strange sense of completion. The mystery of Eliza's fate remained, but the mystery of her own identity had been solved. She had found her family, her history, her name. The three Harringtons stood together as the ceremony concluded, watching. Their flowers joined the hundreds of others floating on the Atlantic's surface. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The emerald butterfly had brought them together, connecting past to present in ways none of them could have imagined. Later, that evening, as Rebecca prepared to leave the Harrington mansion after dinner, Catherine handed her a small velvet box. "We wanted you to have this," she said. "It belonged to James." Inside was a man's signet ring bearing the Harrington family crest. "He wore it every day," Maxwell explained, a rare tenderness in his voice. "As his daughter, it should be yours. Now." Rebecca slipped the ring onto her thumb, the only finger large enough to hold it, feeling the weight of her newfound heritage. "Thank you for everything." "We're the ones who should thank you," Catherine insisted, embracing her. "You've brought light back into this house." As Rebecca drove home along the coastal highway, her father's ring on her hand and her cousin's necklace at her throat, she felt a profound sense of belonging that had eluded her all her life. The sea stretched endlessly beside her, its waves catching the last golden light of sunset. The ocean had taken much from the Harringtons, James, Eliza, years of peace. But in its mysterious way, it had also returned something precious. Lost piece of their family, carrying fragments of truth that might one day become whole. Rebecca smiled as she drove toward Newport, toward her apartment that now felt like just a temporary stopping place. Soon, she would move into the east wing of the Harrington mansion, not to replace the daughter they had lost, but to be the niece they had found. The emerald butterfly caught the fading light, its wings seeming to flutter with life against her skin. Some journeys, Rebecca had learned, took unexpected paths before leading home. Hers had taken 20 years, but she had arrived at last. During the annual Maritime Festival the following year, the Harringtons hosted their traditional dinner party. With one significant addition, Rebecca stood beside Maxwell and Catherine as they greeted their guests, introduced proudly as "our niece, Rebecca Harrington." The investigation into Eliza's disappearance continued, with promising new leads developing from Rebecca's recovered memories. Whether those leads would ever bring complete closure remained uncertain, but the Harringtons had found a kind of peace in the family they had rebuilt from tragedy. As Rebecca mingled with guests, the emerald butterfly around her neck caught a guest's eye, an elderly woman who had once been the town's librarian. "What a beautiful piece," the woman commented. "I've always believed butterflies symbolize transformation, the emergence of new life from what seems to be an ending." Rebecca smiled, touching the necklace that had begun her journey home. "I couldn't agree more." Outside, beyond the windows of the Harrington mansion, the eternal Atlantic continued its rhythmic dance against the shore, keeper of countless secrets, but also the faithful returner of treasures long thought lost.